Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this week's 2026, the first of many this year, Elite Audio video. And as most of you will have realised from the last video, I spent most of the festive period doing some fairly extensive comparisons between the all-in-ones that we previewed in the last video. And in case you've forgotten what they are, I will just quickly recap. So we had the Eversolo Play, which was the standard version that retails at £599. We had the WiiM Amp Ultra, which was the £499 version. And we also had the Bluesound Powernode N330, which retails at £849. I'm not going to go too deeply into the technical specifications. One or two things that I will mention because they are relevant to, I think, how most people will use them. I will, however, talk about the power of each and what my experience was. Now, on paper, the WiiM Amp Ultra should easily have been the most powerful in this test. And the lowest power in terms of rating is the Eversolo Play. So the WiiM Amp has a claimed 100 watts into 8 ohms, and that doubles into 4. The Eversolo is 60 watts into 8 ohms and 110 watts into 4 ohms. And the Bluesound, again, is 80 watts, so the mid-power of the three, and 220 dynamic watts into 4 ohms. I need to double check that because that actually doesn't seem correct to me, however. I'll very quickly say that the reality of those claimed powers were not realised in that order in my listening tests. And the device of the three, which I felt was the most powerful, easily the most powerful, and had the most dynamic headroom, was the Bluesound Powernode, significantly more than the other two. So that's the first little flag, if you want to call it that. Anyway, more to come. Here are my listening notes from the testing, and I'm going to bring up some of the tracks that I used for the testing purposes of this video. The loudspeakers that I used were the Revival Audio Sprint 3s, which are a stand mount speaker retailing around the £900 mark, which I felt was appropriate for the value of the devices we had. I could have probably looked at something of a lower value actually. However, the Sprints give a fairly decent efficiency level, which should therefore afford each of these devices a reasonable amount of dynamic headroom, as was the case. So, a couple of key feature differences. One which I think may or may not apply to a lot of you, but Apple AirPlay is something that I personally like to use on a general system. It means that no matter where I am, I can quickly go into my Apple Music account, play something, and simply allocate it to the AirPlay device itself. In terms of outright sound quality, that's not how I would use that device, but it is quite a nice feature to have nonetheless. They all have HDMI connections, and again, as far as the connectivity of each, it's worth checking each of these devices to make sure that they will match what you want. That's not the purpose of this particular review. This is a purely best sonic performance review and review only. One little feature that the Eversolo Play has, which is actually a phono stage. So if you really want to incorporate a device that does everything you want, including analog inputs, then the Eversolo has that one advantage, one only advantage over the others. You can also order the Eversolo Play with a CD version, which costs £100 more. And effectively, you probably got what our parents would have considered in the past, and certainly in my upbringing in the 1970s, the music centre, and my parents had a Sanyo music centre, I remember it very clearly, tape deck, tuner and turntable all built into one single unit, and it had the obligatory VU meters, which as a young lad I was fascinated by. I really liked that feature. So just to sort of summarise, the Eversolo is probably the most complete in terms of feature set. and for the money. It will tick every major box that you want, including AirPlay, and it's Rune as well, which is another feature, and a keen price. The WiiM on paper has the highest power output, so therefore the power per pound ratio is the best, albeit I didn't find that when I did the listening comparison. The Bluesound probably has the best ecosystem, so there's lots of ways you can expand that, but it's also the most expensive. So the testing method that I did was quite straightforward. I played a series of tracks on a specific playlist, and I then scored each device for bass, control, response, depth, and realism. The same for treble and also sound staging. How did the sound stage present itself? Was it, how three-dimensional was it, and so on. And so it's things like the tone, the texture, was there any listening fatigue, and the behaviour of these amps when you push them pretty hard. So I'm just going to quickly run over a few of these test tracks. I'm going to refer back to my handwritten notes here for this. And one of the tracks that I used was, it was actually an album that I only discovered recently by Status Quo. It's an acoustic album, and I thought it was quite a recent one, but when I looked into it, it's been out for some time. Anyway, there is a track on this album, I'll bring it up on screen, and it's called Rain. It's purely acoustic. It is a brilliant test track. If you want to bring a real sense of the performer into your room, I'd highly recommend that you give this track a listen. In fact, the whole album is definitely worthy of a playlist inclusion for you. So I started off with the WiiM Amp Pro, and I did these in price order. So I played these tracks through and I scored them out of 10 for each of the categories that I gave you. And I also made some notes as well. On the WiiM Amp Pro, this scored an average of 6 out of 10. The bass was a 7, the treble 6, soundstage a 6, but I've put that the vocals sounded slightly edgy on the WiiM Amp. And indeed on the Eversolo, on this I have rated it again as very commendable 6 as well, so very similar to the WiiM. However, when I went to the Bluesound, man, instantly the difference was stark, and without giving too much away, you will find that this theme will run through this very brief review and comparison of the three devices. For bass, I scored the Bluesound a 9, for treble an 8, and for sound staging a 9. The vocals just really had so much presence on this particular track, and I think for me personally, it really took me by surprise. I didn't expect the Bluesound to be as good as it actually was, and in fact, it reminded me probably of the kind of performance expectation I would have of something costing easily twice as much as this. And I know that's a really throwaway and often overused remark by reviewers or even hi-fi retailers. Oh yeah, it'll perform to devices costing up to pick a number and insert it in here. But this genuinely did do that, and I was quite surprised. There's another track, St James Infirmary, which I will again bring up. It's a blues track, and I'll bring up the details on screen. For the WiiM Amp Pro, I felt it was just a bit too edgy, and when I pushed this, because it's a track that actually can warrant fairly high output levels to really get you into it. And I do like this track, and we often use it in showroom events, but I found that when pushed, the WiiM, which is meant to have the most power in this test, did have, I would say, a small amount of distortion. And I'm playing this pretty loud, to be fair, so this is probably above normal listening levels, but this wasn't reflected in the Eversolo, which is effectively, on paper, got less power. And the kind of scoring went 6 points overall for the WiiM, 7 points for the Eversolo, but 9 for the Bluesound. Again, on the Bluesound, wow, this track it was the epitome of what I would expect from a much more expensive device. I know I keep saying this, but there are no doubts at all that the Bluesound in this testing really stood out. Now, it's significantly more expensive than the others, so in reality, I guess where this is leading, you are getting what you pay for. And in many ways, it's reassuring from a retail perspective. There is no unicorn here or magic bullet. Which is best for you will really come back to pricing, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. Another great track by T-Bone Wake called Vietnam. Again, a great test track. And again, the scoring is very similar. 6 points for the WiiM, 6 for the Eversolo, 9 for the Bluesound. So throughout this whole testing process, I've got to say the Bluesound it was the one which I wanted to listen to most often. And in fact, after the testing, I kind of left it in the system and ran it through the holidays, and it never failed to impress. The one thing I would say in terms of usage, which I didn't experience with the other two, was occasionally the Bluesound would just freeze, it would lose the connection to the router, and then it would start playing again maybe 10 seconds later. And it only happened on a few occasions, so I can't say it was a pattern, but I didn't notice that with the other two. They seem to be, in terms of network stability, a little bit more stable, no dropouts, or maybe they're just buffering more, which is also the other aspect that takes place, because I noticed that when I powered up the Eversolo, it took longer to start playing the track than the other two. So in essence, I guess it was buffering more. The internet connection when I was testing wasn't overly fast, so again, that would have something to, or I guess an element that was at play there was the internet connection speed. So here's the other thing, here's the thing.
Here's the thing.
Now here's the thing.
Here's the thing. But here's the thing.
And you can tell, I think, as well, the price points, but in terms of overall build quality and how it feels in the hand, how it operates, even things like the volume control, I've got to give that to the Eversolo. It does feel the best built of the three. The WiiM, I mean, this is a £499 device. It's still it's staggering value for money, whichever way you look at it, an all-in-one sound. I mean, it does sound good, so whilst I'm saying of the three, I would say the WiiM was the least impressive. The Eversolo was really good. I wouldn't say it's massively better than the WiiM. I think they're pretty close in many ways. I think the Eversolo has more refinement than the WiiM does. Certainly in the setup that I had, I was also using high diamond speaker cable as part of the test. And I like the high diamond because it's neutral, it doesn't constrain or restrict any aspect of the frequency spectrum, and rhythm and timing with that cable are exceptional, so I'd always use that for this type of comparative test. And the build quality on the Bluesound was probably slightly better than the WiiM, but not as good as the general feel of the Eversolo. Now that's not to say it's not made well, because it actually is. There's no screen with the Bluesound either. Now that may or may not be a key point for you. I'm kind of meh about the screen, and here's the thing.
Here's the thing.
Now here's the thing.
Here's the thing. But here's the thing.
It's, to me personally, it's more about the sound performance, and if you're using an app on a phone, you can easily see the album artwork. I don't need it on a screen at the other side of the room that's so small you can hardly see it anyway, let's be honest. And that would always be secondary for me. In terms of apps, they're all kind of similar-ish. I quite liked all the three apps. Once you're used to them, to be honest, they're all much of a muchness. Muscle memory, the familiarity of getting to learn an app and how it's, how it's used, again, it just takes time. I wouldn't say one's really much better than the other. They were all very similar. I think, in terms of which one you should buy, quite honestly, if you have the budget, the Bluesound is easily the winner here. I'm going to do a follow-up video, but I'm going to put it up against the 2025 N332 model, which has got 20 watts more power, to see if I personally can hear any difference between the two of them. But I think in terms of value for money, if you have the budget, the Bluesound is the one to have. I think then to decide between the other two is a bit more difficult, and I think a lot would depend on a number of factors. You would think on paper that if you needed more power, the WiiM would be the route to go, yet in reality, they sounded similarly powered, I've got to say, the WiiM and the Eversolo. I found that with both, that to get to a sound, if I want to play it loud, and with the Eversolo, there was times I was almost at maximum volume on it to get it to the level that I wanted to play it at. Whereas on the Bluesound, I think the highest I ever got would be like, 70% of its available volume, and then it was really loud. And I did turn it beyond that, it was just far too loud, but it still, remained composed. The WiiM showed a similar kind of headroom as the Eversolo did, so I can't see any clear advantage there. If you want the most loaded feature set, then the Eversolo would be the one to have, if that's your budget. Ultimately, I think the WiiM has great value for money. It's £100 less, and in this category, if these are the budgets you're working to, you're not going to be disappointed with any of the three in any respect. And the WiiM at $499, I think it's great value for money. It's got a great feature set, no Apple AirPlay, obviously, but it has just about everything else. The screen was nice and clear, the app was easy to use, and overall it gave a good sound. And when you think what you get for that money, it's, again, these are, and I think it proves that the technology has really come on over the years, that you can get something that's as good as this for that kind of outlay. Ultimately though, as a conclusion to this video, the clear winner, which you've really picked up from throughout the theme as the video has progressed, is the Bluesound, and comfortably so. It genuinely took me by surprise. I've listened to it before, and probably more in a less analytical sense, and I thought it was good. I wasn't doing comparisons with it previously, and it's the first time I've done this in depth between all three devices, and the outcome wasn't what I expected, quite honestly. I didn't think there would be such a big gap, performance terms, from the Eversolo up to the Bluesound, because if you shop around, the price gap is about, it's not even £300, it'd be £250, say. And honestly, if you have that £250, and also considering the ecosystem that Bluesound offer, that's where I honestly think the money's best spent. That said, £600 is still a lot of money, and if that's your budget, the Eversolo is not going to disappoint. Equally, if £500 is your budget, the WiiM Ultra, again, is going to give you some nice features, sound, and ease of use. They all offer tone adjustments, some more in depth than others. The more basic one was the Bluesound. The other two offer much more control over lots of different frequencies. Again, I did kind of mess around with these. I found that I preferred the Bluesound with everything turned off. With the Eversolo, I kind of want to mess about with some of the different EQ elements of that, and to kind of fine tune the sound I wanted. Same with the WiiM. So there we go. Each has its own merits. They're all really good devices. There is no bad device here. And when you're making these comparisons, often we are splitting hairs. But I have to again reiterate, the performance gap from the Eversolo play to the Bluesound is instantly audible. I mean, it's instant. It's not a case of, does this sound better? Having to go back and forward. Where I noticed it the most, well, in fact, it was on a lot of them. There was Blue Nile Over the Hillside, excuse me, which is a very atmospheric track with snare drum, cymbals, and a really snap to certain parts of it. On the Bluesound, it just was exactly how I wanted to hear it. You know, the real clean snap. The Eversolo kind of smoothed it off a little bit, as did the WiiM. And again, you know, the biggest difference I really heard was on the Status Quo acoustic album. And again, this is, to me, was a great test bed, because with the Bluesound, it felt like they were, honestly, they were in the room. It really, it performed beyond its expectations, and you can tell by my enthusiasm, it's a device that has really shocked me in what it does. And I think it could worry genuinely some more expensive integrateds moving further up the scale. So, you know, if you're a budget of even say up to £1,500, I would say the Bluesound should be brought into your consideration if you want something that can do everything for you, and it really can. So, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed doing the comparisons. And the next video is going to be back to the DACs, where we're going back to the Pontus 15th versus the Musical Fidelity versus the Metrum, and to see which one of these is the best in class. And we've got lots of other comparative type videos that we're going to be doing in the future. We've also got the hi-fi show at Bristol, which we're exhibiting. We're in the Matthew suite this time rather than the room on the 4th floor. So we're in the lower basement this time. Some might say we're better off in the lower basement, maybe that's where we belong, but no, and we're right next to the acoustic energy room, so we're opposite them. It's the room that Cyrus had last year, so we are occupying that this year, and we're going to be having, again, Electro Compagnie, but we're going to be ECI 6 this time integrated, ECI 80D integrated, and we'll be using the ECM1 Mark II streamer. We will also be using the Lindemann Woodnote Solo as a streaming source for the ECI 80D, which we'll be using into a pair of Revival Audio Atalanti 3 loudspeakers. We'll also have the Audio Physic Classic 25 40th anniversary speakers, which have picked up a great review. These are amazing, and they've now got a newer version coming out, which has got even more enhancements to this for the same price. So there's a lot for you to hear. I hope you can come along to Bristol and see us there. I'm certainly excited about doing the show. Again, I love the Bristol show. Get to meet so many people there, and it's always a brilliant environment with a great atmosphere. And Bristol's such a lovely place as well. Equally, if you want to pick my brains on anything, here is my direct email address. I like the fact that a lot of you use this, and I've really enjoyed helping you understand your systems better, helping you find what the next upgrade should be, and where maybe if there's any weakness in your system, or what you should look at next as the sort of, as I said, the next upgrade. So please keep those emails coming in. And finally, if you've enjoyed watching this video, take a few seconds to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can know exactly when our next video comes out. So, as ever, thank you for watching the video this week. Have a great week listening to music, and I will look forward to talking to you next time.